Welcome to this episode of the Deep Dive. We're just waiting for our friend Tynan to theoretically come online. But while we're just chilling here, I thought we'd just kind of hang out a bit. What up in the chat? Can you all hear me? Can you see me? Can you hear me? Ah. Hello. Perfect. Fantastic. How are we all doing, guys? Guys, I should use more less gendered pronouns. Hey TV Cuber, hey Gaurav from India. Hey Ali, can I be a mod? Golden Quill. Golden Quill, you want to be a mod? Sure, why not? Let's make you a mod. Add moderator. Why are you two in the room? Is it Molly behind? Yes, it's Molly behind. Say hi, Molly. Sup, dude. Affirmative. Hey, Hamish. Hey, Colin. Hey, Matt. Man, I'm so excited for this conversation. I freaking love this dude. Ooh, I just got a like on Bumble. Haha. Winning at life. Winning at life. Is it this dude? How about call us all magnificent beasts? All right, you magnificent beasts. Welcome to the live stream. Ah, perfect. Right. We have Tynan in the house. So let's add him to the call. And hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Going good. We are officially live on the YouTube.
Wow,
if that's cool with you.
Yeah, never been live before. It's first.
Oh, you haven't? Oh man, first time for everything.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm just setting up a few different scenes on the software. Whoops. How does this work? Let's remove that. Let's add that. Switch cameras. That's fine. Remove.
You've got a good setup over there. You've got a good camera hooked up and everything. It looks
Thank you.
great.
Yeah. I like to go a bit overkill with the setup. We've got like this huge light that's kind of pointing at my face.
Nice.
Yeah, if the content isn't very good, then I try and make sure the production value is fine. So that's how I get
Yeah,
over
at least
that
you
bit.
got the presentation. Perfect.
Exactly. So hey, thank you very much for coming onto the deep dive. We have,
Of course.
We've got 300 people watching so far, and we've got loads of people kind of in the comments very excited for this conversation that we're about to have.
Great, me too.
So I wonder if we could get started. If you could just kind of give an introduction for people in the chat who might not know who you are, just kind of your background, what do you do at the moment, and yeah, just a general intro.
Sure, yeah. I always have trouble with this one because I think really the definition of what I do is I just sort of do sort of weird things that I think are on the extremes of what normal people do, and then I try to take lessons from them. Usually, I go back more in the middle, and then I sort of try to share those lessons with other people through books or blogs, stuff like that. So some examples are, let's say, I dropped out of school to be a professional gambler when I was in college. I moved to LA to become a pickup artist. I lived with Mystery and Neil Strauss and all those people for a while. What else? I lived in my RV for a long time, like way before people were doing that, like 12, 13 years ago. Sold everything, traveled around the world, sort of also before anybody was doing that. And now these days, I still, well, these specific days I don't travel very much, but usually I travel a whole lot. I've been buying home bases all around the world with my friends. I program, I do some coaching, I write. I've written a bunch of books. I don't know. Yeah, see, I'm always all over the place with my intro, but that's the overview.
Nice. Your camera feed seems to have cut out. I can still hear you audio-wise.
You can't see me in my thing either.
Yeah, your screen is just very frozen.
Yeah, let me see if I can fix that real quick. Huh, that's so weird. I'm not sure what's going on.
Very odd.
Yeah. You want to just want me
See
to
if we try. Yeah, if we try and restart Skype or something, maybe that would work.
Yeah, let me just close my Skype. I'll call you in a sec.
Sure. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Dude is skilled at talking without opening his mouth. Lol. That intro is fire though. Yeah, man. Ollie, how are you so calm? Guys, I've been following Tynan online for the last for over a year now, and he's just like really cool. So I'm so excited to dive into this conversation. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So hang on. Let's close this one and let's add him to this. Oh, we're back.
How's that? You see me?
Yes, you're moving now. Perfect.
Great.
Okay, cool.
Great.
So thank you very much for that intro. I know it's always a little bit awkward, kind of doing an intro. Like, how do you describe what you do? I think so. I've been following you on the internet in like a non-creepy way since your appearance on Noah Kagan's podcast, which I discovered like sometime last year. And then anytime I discover someone who seems cool online, I then just kind of listen to all the podcasts they've ever been on. And so I've got like a long list of things that I really wanted to talk to you about. But I think kind of if we start at kind of what you're doing right now, because like my thing on the internet is that, so I'm a doctor full time these days, but from August I'm taking a sabbatical, taking a year out of medicine to like explore other interests and things. And I've kind of had this thing in the back of my mind that like, what am I going to do? And I sort of look at examples of kind of people like you who seem to have this sort of portfolio career on the internet of like kind of doing a bit of blogging, bit of writing, bit of coaching, bit of consulting, like here and there. And I wonder what that's like as kind of as an experience. So like, if that makes sense, like what's it like not having like a defined kind of job and just sort of being your own agent, which is the impression from what I think you get up to these days.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's a little hard to define because I don't really know what the other side is like. So I'm sort of defining it in a void, right? But it's great. I mean, I love it. You know, I feel like the real benefit of it is that every day I can work on whatever I'm most excited about, most into. And so whatever I'm doing generally has like 100% of my focus, and I'm like motivated to do it. Whereas I had a normal job for like 9 months, and there were some days when I was in that zone and I was excited to work. Then there were other days where I was like, I'd rather go weed my garden or something like that, and you just can't do it. So I think that's probably the part of it that appeals most to me, is that I can just work on whatever I want on a long-term basis, but even just on a daily basis.
Okay. And so what do you think when you wake up in the morning? Do you like, what's your reason to get out of bed? Do you kind of think I'm excited to kind of do a bit more coding on like SETT.com, or I'm excited to do some cruise sheet stuff, like what, or it's excited to take a T class? Like, what's the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning?
Yeah, I mean, there's always something that I'm excited about doing. Maybe not always, but generally. So, oftentimes it's programming. If I'm smart about it, I'll leave myself an interesting problem the night before, so that way I have something really exciting to work on. I as you mentioned, I drink my tea every day, so I'm always excited about drinking my tea every day. Just generally, I really like my life. I really like my routine. So it's not always a specific thing. It's more, I wake up and I'm like, ooh, got a lot of good stuff to do today. Let's get to it.
Nice. Cool. So,
but I sit in bed for 15, 20 minutes, read Reddit too. So, it's not all productivity.
So you're a normal person as well. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a long list of things on my list of things that I wanted to talk to you about. The first one on the list is cruise ships. What do you love about cruises?
Oh, man, I love just about everything about cruises. I think what I like most about them is that it's sort of like this weird alternate reality you get to live in for usually a couple weeks. I mostly go on really long cruises, a couple weeks, where you're so removed, you're in the middle of the ocean, so you're so far removed from any real problem that even if your house was burning down, there's just nothing you can do about it. And there's something sort of comforting about that feeling of like, all right, I'm in this little space. And that also means that there's going to be so few external interruptions that you can plan out this cruise and say, okay, well, I'm here for 14 days. I'm going to do this project. Here's how much I have to do every day. And here's how I'm going to work that into my schedule. And so you have this schedule. I always get a ton of work done on cruises, but I also, in between when I'm not working, I get to climb a rock wall while I look out at the sea, or have tea for 2 hours with my friends, or eat lobsters or whatever. So it's sort of this good mix for me of like really getting customized my experience to be really productive, but also really enjoyable, and do the things I like to do.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. So I've never been on a cruise before, but my housemate is like big on cruises and absolutely loves going cruises.
Nice.
She's just chilling in the background, saying hello.
What's up, Larry? Housemate?
And then I think I read one of your blog posts about why working on a cruise ship is like the best thing ever. And it just kind of made me realize that, for ages I've wanted to like write a book, for example. And I think the example you used was that you can just write a book when you're on a cruise. So I wonder if you can tell us a story of how you kind of wrote, how do you write a book like on a cruise / in general?
Yeah, I'd say my routine for writing a book on a cruise is so good that I'm sort of unwilling to write books not on cruises at this point, because it feels so much worse. So what I do is I pick how many pages I want it to be, or how many words I want it to be.
Yeah.
And then, just a ballpark. And then I sort of add 10, 20% or something like that, just so I can make sure I fit it. And then I divide that up. So I say I've got, 70,000 words I have to write. I've got 14 days. So I'm going to write, 500 or 5,000 words per day. And, I know that I can write up to about 7,000 per day just from previous experience. And so 5,000 is a few hours of work probably, right? So it's like a lot, but not like a crazy, I'm going to have to skip all meals kind of amount. So then the first day, or sometimes before the first day you get on the ship usually at 4 p.m. So it's like not going to be a full productivity day. So I'll write an outline for the book. And what I do is basically, just because I'm a blogger, I've been blogging forever, I just sort of think of it as individual blog posts. And so I organize it by sections, and I just write whatever I can think of. And I don't stress too much about it because I know that it's going to change. So I just write enough to get myself started. And then every day, starting the following day, I wake up, or usually I work most in between lunch and dinner, or tea and dinner, depending on what I'm doing. And I just write until I hit my quota for that day. And I just pick the topics that I'm most excited about. So if I'm writing about social skills and I just had like some amazing meals with my friends, I'll talk about hosting friends for meals or something like that. And I don't worry about if it's going to flow with the other parts. I just write it. And if you do that, it's kind of the easiest possible way to write a lot of words. I'll go through all of my writing, and then at the end of the cruise, what you end up with is a huge amount of work. I mean, you've got your 70,000 words. I've never failed to overwrite whatever my limit was. And, by nature, I'm a procrastinator too, so anybody could do this. And then after that, when you have 70,000 words, it's pretty easy to find the motivation to like, all right, well, let me tighten it up a little bit. Let me organize this a little bit more. So I think there have been times I've actually edited it on the boat as well, but usually I'll just spend the week or two after the cruise, just sort of a few hours here and there, kind of editing it.
Nice. Now that sounds like a pretty solid routine. So there's an exam that I'm preparing for at the moment to apply to residency in the US for medical stuff called the USMLE, and that's quite a lot of work. But I've been thinking that, hey, once the whole cruise industry starts to get back on track, it would be kind of cool just going on like a 1 month cruise, 2 week cruise, and literally just sort of setting this goal for myself. I'm going to do 300 questions each day, get through an entire question bank of like a few thousand questions, and then just kind of chill the rest of the time on the cruise because they have gyms and food and stuff, and it just seems like an interesting kind of atmosphere. And it would be quite fun just kind of making videos on a cruise ship. I think that would be kind of cool.
It would be totally perfect for that. And the funny part is, once you get off the cruise, a week later, you don't really remember the hours that you were working because they were just sort of the background of every day. So you like magically have this big chunk of work done, and you're like, yeah, and I did that fun surf machine, and I did the rock climbing, and I had these great conversations with my friends. So it's kind of interesting how you remember it differently.
Nice. So, you talked about writing a book about social skills, and this is actually, so it's called Superhuman Social Skills. We've got a link in the video description and on the Notion page for everyone listening in the chat. I read this, I think, a few weeks after I had discovered your stuff, because I stumbled across your blog, and then I was like, oh, you write books as well, and you had a book about social skills, and I am very keen on reading about social skills and improving social skills, because I'm a strong believer in the whole growth mindset thing, and that, relationships are the most important part of life. So why wouldn't you put the time and effort into kind of actively sort of improving your social skills? I wonder if you can kind of just give us an overview of what are the, like, what is Superhuman Social Skills about, and what are the things that we as kind of the audience can do to kind of quick wins to improve our social skills?
Sure, yeah. So I did it because, I got into pickup, and it never occurred to me that any social skills were a skill, which is sort of stupid, but it just never occurred to me. I thought, kind of born with what you've got, and that's what you go through life with. And so I went through that, and of course became much better with women. But what I also noticed was that my relationships with like all of my friends, all of my family members, even just strangers as I would meet them, were much better. And it was very obvious why, right? And I found a lot of people would come to me, friends or acquaintances, and they say, hey, I'm not really interested in pickup, but like, I know that like my storytelling isn't very good. Or I know that certain areas of my social skills aren't good. Do you think I should do pickup to learn it? And no, you probably shouldn't. Like, probably going to a nightclub 7 days a week isn't the best way to learn to make friends, right? And so that's sort of why I wrote the book, is I thought maybe I can take what I've learned and put it into a package where you don't have to learn pickup to learn these really valuable social skills. So I think the biggest takeaway from it is that you actually can learn social skills. I think a lot of people shared that belief I had, where you've got what you've got, and if you aren't good at making friends, then that's the kind of person you are. It's not the kind of skill set you have. So that's the big one. And I think that what comes with that is that if it is a skill set, you need to learn it, and you kind of need to be the proactive one. You can't just wait around for other people with good social skills to befriend you, because probably that's not going to happen, right? Or at least it may not happen on the scale that you want it to happen. So there's a lot of stuff about working on yourself, where you have to think about, what's the experience this other person wants? Is that an experience I'm willing to give them or have the ability to give them? And if so, how can I do that? And then a lot of it is just sort of logistical stuff, where, I recommend a lot of people just make a weekly thing. You're going to invite people to it. It can be the easiest possible thing in the world. We're going to go to this restaurant and get pizza or whatever every week. But even just, there's a lot of value in being that person that's the hub that brings people together. And if you just are willing to provide that value to a social group, that's a really good start to actually having a social group, or having a better one.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first introduction to this kind of idea that social skills were ultimately a skill was through the whole pickup thing. So like all teenagers do these days, I read The Game when I was like 15. And then I sort of went down the rabbit hole and was like, oh, this is like magic. I think it's the sort of thing that appeals to a nerdy sort of person, but potentially, a little bit annoyed that, the guys on the football team are going to all the parties and all this sort of stuff, being like, oh, this is cool stuff. And then like a few of my friends got into it as well, and sort of there was The Game, there was Models by Mark Manson, and a few others. And I realized like very early on that there's stuff that you can learn from this whole pickup thing that actually just applies to life in general. Rather than just to this kind of very narrow, niche, however you define it thing. I wasn't going to bring up the pickup stuff because I imagine you get it a lot because of the whole like association. But I wonder, what do you say when people are like, oh, you're a pickup artist? Isn't that all like sleazy and manipulative and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly can be, right? Like, some people who get into it are getting into it for that reason. Some instructors are like that. So it's not like that is not an element within that community. And to be honest, I've been out of it for a dozen years, so I don't really even know what's going on in it. But my experience of it, I think honestly, when I got into it, I assumed kind of the same, and I was okay with that, because I was just like, I'm starting off at such a low point that, like, okay, if I have to do some things that, like, I make some people uncomfortable a little bit, like, maybe that's the cost and whatever. What I actually found, though, was that it was sort of the opposite of that. What it really is at its foundation, and I found that this completely falls on deaf ears to people who already have a preconceived notion, and that's fine. But what I've found is that what actually works is understanding who you are as a person. So you're understanding what value you bring to a relationship and what limitations you have that maybe you want to address or maybe you don't want to address. And you have to understand, and I think this was one of the biggest realizations for me personally, was what experience does a woman want when you're talking to her? I had no idea. I just, as a guy, I think I hadn't thought about it, and I just thought, well, I'd like it if a girl came up and told me she liked me. That would be amazing. No girl's ever done that. So I should go up to girls and tell them I like them, because that's the nice thing to do. And I just was clueless of their perspective. So I think what it is at its foundation really is understanding yourself, understanding women in general in terms of how that dynamic works, and then having the skills to understand women on an individual basis, right? How do you build that environment where you can have a conversation and really get to know each other, not just be at a bar and be like, hey, you're hot, you want to go out sometime, which is, sort of what people think you do. So my experience was the complete opposite from that. And I think that's true of everybody I know who was in it at a deep level.
Okay. And just kind of in general, I think anytime I talk about, I don't know, reading a book like Superhuman Social Skills or anything vaguely related to that side of life, there's always a few people that say, oh, well, why can't you just be yourself? And isn't all of this just like, surely you can just be yourself? Like, how would I imagine that's something that you get a lot as well. Like, how do you kind of talk about this idea of being yourself versus this idea of kind of actively improving yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair question too, because I think if you think like, well, I don't want to change everything about myself just to have friends, what's the point? It doesn't feel authentic. So I think that's a really fair question to ask. What I would say is that I think first of all, you want to know, a lot of it isn't really changing yourself, it's changing how you communicate what it is that's true about you. For example, if you go up to someone, you say, hey, I'm a really great friend, I'm really trustworthy, I'm great with secrets, you can tell me whatever you want, I'm a lot of fun, let's hang out sometime, probably it's off-putting, right? And so it's more about who am I, who's this other person, and how do I build that bridge between us? So I'd say most of it is about building that bridge. On the other hand, I think a lot of people aren't aware of, most people aren't 100% in love with every aspect of themselves. And I think that would be especially true if they really understood how they affected other people. So it's pretty common to meet people who clearly have really good hearts and say want to connect with other people, but they talk too much. And so that actually is pushing them away from other people. So they think of themselves as someone who's trying to connect, but their actions are actually pushing them away. So I think a lot of it is really just understanding who you really are in relation with other people, and how do you build that bridge that you want to build. I don't think anybody should become somebody totally different unless that's their path they're going on anyway.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. One of the exercises in Superhuman Social Skills that I really enjoyed was the A to Z exercise. I wonder if you can kind of talk to us a little bit about that and kind of expand on it. And I'm sure people will kind of get the book off Amazon after the thing.
Sure, yeah. That I forget who told me. It wasn't an original idea by me. It was probably one of the pickup guys. And the idea was that sometimes, especially for someone who's naturally introverted like myself, maybe a lot of people listening, it's really intimidating to think, okay, I'm going to be proactive in this social situation, which sort of means I'm going to take responsibility for the conversation. What if I have nothing to say? And I think a lot of people feel that way. And so what you do is you write down the letters, A to Z, and next to each one you write a story, or you kind of come up with a story that begins with that letter. So A might be acrobatics, the time I tried to learn how to be an acrobat. B might be building a school bus with my friends or whatever. So C, it could just be a loose relationship, doesn't really matter. And then you just sort of think about, true stories from your life for each of these letters. And then what's funny is people make this list and they almost never actually use it. But if you go into an interaction and you're like, yeah, well, I got 26 stories that I can tell at any time that I know are pretty good, you just feel more confident. You feel more at ease. And ultimately, when you're confident and you're at ease in a conversation, whether you talk about those stories or not, it's probably going to go a lot better. So and sometimes you do use the stories as well. It also gives you sort of a starting point if you want to work on storytelling. You've got 26 stories to polish, which can take a long time, so you have a lot of work.
Yeah. So when I first read that I think that was my first introduction to this idea of storytelling in particular being a skill. And then after reading that, so a book I'm reading these days is Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. I don't know if you've come across that, but that's all about kind of improving the art of storytelling. He is like a storyteller. There are these the moth competitions, like storytelling competitions,
Okay.
and he's won like lots of these over the years. So he's written this book about how to tell good stories, and in it he talks about this homework for life, which I've started doing ever since I read the book, so a few months ago. And that is at the end of every day, you kind of look back in your day and you ask yourself, what is the most story-worthy moment of my day?
I
And you
like
just
that.
sort of write a few notes about it. And then kind of as the book progresses, it gives you ideas about ways that you can craft the stories. And I think like before coming across your book and this one, just this idea of storytelling even being like a thing in my mind just like wasn't a factor. I just sort of assumed that, those people at university who are funny and tell funny stories. Oh, yeah, I guess I just didn't really consider it a skill that could be developed.
Yeah.
I wonder if you've got any sort of quick or less quick tips about storytelling and how we can kind of improve at doing the thing.
Yeah. So I think, the common mistakes, if nobody's ever complained that somebody tells stories that are too short, right? Many people have complained that people tell stories that are too long. If in general, there's sort of three phases to a story. There's setting up the premise, which is basically just giving just enough information that the arc of the story will make some sense, right? So if I skip that and I say, so then we're sitting there in the cave, it's like, what cave are you in, right? If I say, oh, my friends and I went to this cave in Texas, we'd been waiting for months to explore, and we finally went there. Now you understand where we are in the story. After that, we're going to work on the build-up. And so essentially, that's sort of building up to the big finale of the story. If your story doesn't have a big finale, you need to really think about why you're telling it, right? And then the last phase is sort of the payoff, which is like the big twist or the story doesn't make sense. Why are we going on this journey? Here's this crystallizing moment. So most people give way too much premise, first of all. They say, oh, I was with my friend, and actually he's this guy I met in college, and the way we met was actually sort of interesting. We met, and it's like, I don't know why you're telling me this. And if I don't understand why you're telling me this, I probably don't care, right? There's no context for me. So you want to make it really quick. Then the build up is the part you want to make long as the person's interesting. So you watch their eyes, eventually you learn other cues, and you sort of want to tease them with it a little bit because that's the fun of it. Nobody's watching a movie to figure out what happens in the end. People are watching a movie so that they care about what happens in the end, right? They get to know the characters, they get to see this journey, they get to see how it almost got derailed, how it started going well. So you want to take people on that journey, and you want to stay really focused on that journey. Again, no tangents, right? And then the end, the payoff, you want to be very quick, right? And that's when we realized, and that's it. In ideal situations that you've told this story and someone's like, wait a minute, what happened then? Or like, wait, said that in the middle this happened. Whatever happened to him? If somebody's asking you questions about the story was a little bit too short, that's great. That's called a conversation, and that's the whole point of telling that story. So I'd say stick to the three phases, and especially the beginning and the end, make them really short. Keep the middle just to the right length of time that people are really engaged, and that might be an hour, or it might be 30 seconds. It can really vary. And I think maybe one other thing I'd say, I mean, there's a lot you could say about it. Another one would be think about why you're telling this story. If you're telling this story because you're excited to tell it, maybe not the best reason. If you're telling it because it's going to be interesting to that person, or it's going to be instructive to that person, or it says something about you that you want that person to know that will be something you can bond over, maybe that's a good reason to tell the story. Or if the other person's nervous and they just want to and you just want to fill the air, maybe that's a good reason too. But I think people don't think about why they say things; they just say things.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because storytelling is kind of a pretty important part of just kind of developing good social skills in general. Like,
Yeah.
I guess if any of us sort of think about the people who we think in our heads would be the most sociable, the most charismatic, often within that list, those people would just be pretty good storytellers and would be able to entertain, inspire, like whatever, like, an audience just with a simple story. I think that's like a really powerful thing that any of us can develop, and that helps us in life, just whatever you're doing.
It's such a huge one, and it really, even beyond like, let me tell you about this amazing thing that happened to me, and telling a story like that,
Yeah.
it changes the way you communicate, because again, sort of like other things we've talked about, you're really considering where the other person is in that process of hearing the information, and you guide them on the best possible path for that. So it is one of those things that you learn it to be able to tell a story, but it does extend beyond that.
Cool. So that was sort of based on Superhuman Social Skills, which is one of your books. You've got another one called Forever Nomad, which I read immediately after Superhuman Social Skills and intend to reread because, well, I mean, I think for a lot of people like us, ever since we read Tim Ferriss's 4 Hour Workweek, then suddenly just like, I want to become a nomad type lifestyle feels like it's been unlocked. And so that was a big part of what I wanted to do in my year out from medicine. I was gonna, hashtag travel the world. I was gonna go on my laptop, make videos alongside, but then the whole coronavirus thing happened, and who knows when we're going to be allowed to travel again. But I'm curious as to what, I guess it's a very big question, but what was your experience kind of living as a nomad? And I guess why do you no longer live as a nomad?
Well, I think I kind of still do, but it's changed. So when I first started, I thought of myself as like a big traveler. And then Tim Ferriss's book came out, and I read it, and I was like, oh, he's actually doing it. I'm sort of thinking that I'm going to do it someday and doing a little bit of it, but like there's sort of this like sharp contrast where I was like, oh, I'm not really doing what I think I'm doing. And so my best friend Todd and I, we both sold all of our stuff. We packed these 28-liter backpacks, which are relatively small, and we just went out there, and we were gone for 9 months. We went all around the world, and it was amazing. I mean, I think maybe I'd never been to Europe at that point. No, I must kind of forget. I had not been to all the continents for sure. I'd been to maybe 20 countries or 10 countries, 15, something like that. And it was really a big eye opener for me. I went to a lot of places that were, very foreign to me. And like most people who start that, I was obsessed immediately, because it's such, you just gain such a perspective and a wealth of experiences. There's this common experience that when you come back from that, you feel like all of your friends' lives were on pause and yours was in fast forward. Like you just lived like 5 or 10 years of experience in this short amount of time. And it's sort of addicting because it really is a great value. And so I continued to do that for many years. And sort of as the years went on, I started having this nagging feeling where I was like, I'm not getting the same things out of this that I used to be. Like, I don't want to go back to before because that feels wrong, but this also like isn't scratching maybe this is how drug users feel. I don't know. It's just like it's just not working anymore, And so I experimented a little bit and I thought a lot about it. And what I realized is that there is a lot of value in having a breadth of experience, but I'd sort of given up depth of experience. There were some places like Japan where I would go back once or twice a year, but there were a lot of places I would just go once and I would sort of make friendships that would evaporate. And so, and then the other big part for me was that it was pretty obvious my productivity was going down. I think I was doing the best you can or the best I could with that many distractions and traveling, but it wasn't great. And so in trying to reconcile this, it seemed like nobody else had really reconciled it, or at least that I could find that were writing about it. And so I thought a lot about it. And the solution for me was to set up home bases all around the world with my friends in a really inexpensive way. And so actually, I don't know if you can see the map behind me. I've got my orange flags for where they are. And so we have, I think, 5 home bases, one in Europe, one in Asia, one in Hawaii, one in the US, and then we have an island. And in each of these, I can have a good routine. I can become part of the local community. I can have friends there. I can be a regular at different restaurants and stuff like that. And I can just sort of get to know these cultures better. And so that's worked for me. It's not, there's still tweaks to be made. I'm definitely, especially being in Vegas now for 3 months, realizing just how productive I am when I don't travel at all. I realize, okay, I'm not really as productive at some of these places as I am here, but that's sort of been the evolution for me.
Oh, okay. I think your webcam thingy has frozen again. I wonder if we can just do a quick reset.
God, that's annoying. Sorry.
Okay, let's try again. No, we're back.
We're back. Sorry about that, man. I don't know what's going on.
No, that's all right. So this idea of home bases, I think this is very interesting. I wonder if you can kind of elaborate on that, kind of give us an introduction to the home base situation for the people watching who may not have read the book / listened to every podcast you've ever been
on. Sure. So I think really the origin of it was, it must have been senior year of high school. No, I guess it was freshman year of college. My friends and I watched this movie called Road Trip, which I don't know if people have seen it, but it was part of it. These people steal this short bus and they go on this road trip on it. It looked really fun. And I sort of had this idea where I was like, maybe my friends and I could buy a road trip, buy a school bus, because we enjoyed road trips. And we could go, have this thing. Everybody thought it was a bad idea. My dad said, this is probably, you have a lot of crazy ideas. This is probably going to be your worst. Don't do it. Everybody was worried that we would fight. There's like the, money and friends sort of thing. And we ended up buying this school bus, and it was like the best thing any of us had ever done. Like, this must be like, 20 years ago or something. And we still talk about it and how great it was. And so it was interesting because it was the first time, I think, where, each of us paid $500 for the school bus. And we had this asset that was incredible. I mean, it was worth, $6,000, $7,000. And we would have invited each other on it anyway. So there wasn't really it wasn't like we were really sharing it in some, like sharing a pizza sort of way. And so I think that sort of planted the seed in my mind. And so I'd always wanted to buy this island, or an island in general. I would go private islands online. I would go there probably monthly to see if there were any affordable islands. All of them were like, you'd have to fly to Singapore and then fly to Malaysia on a, and then a commuter thing and hire a guy in a canoe to bring you. So it was very impractical. And a friend of mine found cheap islands in Canada. And he said, hey, how about we buy one of these? So a week later, we bought this island in Canada. And again, people thought it was going to be this big disaster. And it got on Hacker News. And boy, I mean, half the people were really into it. And half of them were like, this is a disaster. It's going to be like Lord of the Flies, all this. And you know what? It ended up being like the best thing any of us had ever done. And so I think both of those sort of really warmed me up to this idea. I think the next one was Budapest. I was really enjoying Budapest. I like Europe in general, but there was never anywhere in Europe where I felt super compelled to spend more time there. Like Paris is such a beautiful country. I've had such a city. I've had such an amazing time there, but I never feel like I've got to get back to Paris. But Budapest really felt that way. I thought I can't wait to go back. And I went back, I think, again. And I happened to look at real estate prices, and they were so cheap. It was like under $100,000 for sort of a 2-bedroom apartment in like the center of the city. And I just thought, boy, that's such a good deal. I bet I can convince my friends to buy this. Oh, I guess we had already bought the Vegas one by then too. So that's sort of a different thing. So we just sort of did these one by one, and every time it just worked out amazing. And what was interesting was that there were people like me who would spend a lot of time, like, I cut the first trail by hand on that island, and I'm there. I think there's never been an island trip that I haven't been on. So, I've gone probably 20, 30 times. There's other people who have been once, or there's one guy who's never been to the island who owns it. And what's interesting is even they feel like it's a good value because they're like, yeah, I don't have to do any work. I paid some small amount of money. I get to follow along with the progress. And I know it's always there if I want to go visit. So there's sort of this interesting thing where these incentives are naturally lined up correctly. And so now I sort of have this group where if I just say, hey, I'm buying a place in Timbuktu, I could probably put an offer in tomorrow, and I know 4 people who would just put in money for it anyway. And it's been great. We've had 0 arguments. We've had 0 conflicts. We had one person ever who sold his share, and it was sort of like he just wanted to get in on a newer property, didn't have the funds available, and somebody had wanted to get in, so they made this deal. So yeah, it's just been super awesome. It's been really easy, and yeah, I think more people should do it.
Yeah, so so when I first came across this sort of island thing, I think I read the post in Hacker News like ages and ages and ages ago, and then it just kind of went out of my mind. And then I realized that it was you when I heard you on Noah's podcast, and then everyone I was meeting, like all my friends, I was like, guys, we've got to buy an island together at some point, and they were like, what? How
You
can you buy an
got
island?
it.
I was like, no, if you split it like 10 or 15 ways, surely it wouldn't be that expensive. Like, imagine how fun it would be. And then I started floating this idea that, I think it'd be really cool to have a house like somewhere in Tokyo. And how many people kind of get together to sort of maybe buy a place in Tokyo? And sort of, I kind of decided that when me and my friends are in our 30s, like have a bit more disposable income and stuff, then it's definitely a goal to kind of do the
Good.
buying a random property thing. A few bits that I know you've addressed in other podcasts, but like a common query from people might be, why don't you Airbnb it some of the time? Why don't you Airbnb these properties some of the time?
Yeah, it's funny. We have one guy, you know Noah. So Noah's, he's in on some of these properties. And at first, he always wanted to Airbnb them. It's this like very friendly conflict where he'd be like, come on, guys, let's Airbnb. And I'm like, here's some reasons I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, all right, we've got a place in Tokyo. None of us want to go to the Olympics. Let's Airbnb it for just the Olympics. And then he's like, actually, I want to go for the Olympics. So it's kind of funny. But uh, the reason is that I think it would change the dynamic a little bit. So first of all, you can't really split the labor of doing Airbnb 10 ways. It's going to be one person that's going to do it. It's probably going to be me, if we're being honest. And first of all, I don't want that job anyway, but I certainly don't want that job if I'm splitting the money a billion different ways, right? Just like it's a lot of work for not much return. It also, right now, like I've got a little in Budapest, they use a lot of coins. And so, kind of like you do over in the UK. And so I've got like a tin full of all my coins. It's not a lot of money. It's probably $30 in coins. Actually, I keep my bills there too, because what's the point of carrying them anywhere else? And like, yeah, if we Airbnb it, I have to like think about that and be careful about that. Like, it just changes it. Like, it's no longer your home, or at least it wouldn't feel that way to me. So I think those are the big reasons.
Yeah. So how many people do you have on these on average?
I think the smallest is Tokyo. Or I think Hawaii and Tokyo, we both have six or seven. The island is 10. Budapest might be like eight or 10, something like that.
Okay. And how do you go about, like, do you just like send a like WhatsApp broadcast message to all your friends and be like, hey, do you want to do this? Or like how do you get this sort of network of friends who would be up for doing this sort of thing? Is it something that kind of happened accidentally as a result of the fact that you're a blogger and you put yourself out there online, or was it sort of a more intentional sort of building the network, if that makes sense?
I would say it's a very intentional building network, but not for this purpose. It was more, I think what happens when you're like a real nomad for a long time, many of your friendships end up being with people who are uh, all around the world. And so you sort of build this international network, which takes a lot longer because you have a lot less face time than if you lived in the same
Mm.
city. But it tends to be people who are really into kind of weirder ideas because they've already made this weird lifestyle idea. So it took a long time to have that group of friends. Although a lot of them are also, I'd say half or maybe like San Francisco kind of US based friends. Um, and so I have a very specific format. I call it the hard sell, and it's sort of become a joke now because sent so many of these.
Oh, interesting.
But
Okay.
but it's an email, and so I say the subject is let's buy a place, let's buy an island, or let's buy a place in Budapest. And we got a big glorious picture of Budapest or the island or whatever, and then it's just sort of this format where I'm like, all right, here's the research I've been doing. Here's how much it's going to cost. First off, here's why this is the place to buy, and then I try to set sort of the vision for what it's going to be. And the reason is I want to make sure that, for example, with the island, let's say, I want to buy the island because I want a fun place to go with my friends to like build stuff with our hands because we don't get to do that much of that these days. We get to bond, we get to have campfires, we get to like go fishing and cook fish, we get to sink boats and try to figure out how to unsink them. And once it's settled, we can go there and work and read and write. So it's sort of a retreat kind of setting. If somebody's like, oh man, private island, that's great, we can have raves and rent it out like Richard Branson all the time, probably that's going to cause some conflict. So I try to set the vision of what I'm looking for to make sure that people who say yes are looking for the same sort of thing. And then what I do is I say, if you're interested, let me know if you're interested. If you're not interested, and we'll kind of go from there. And so typically, if I have like, let's say I need 8 people, if I have 5 people, I'm like, all right, well, I can get another 3 probably, and so that's enough that I'll just start moving forward. And then I don't collect money until it's like basically till we've probably I've paid the deposit because I've got to pay some of the money too, and then I collect all the money. So yeah, pretty straightforward.
Wow. Okay. What sort of ballpark prices are we talking about? So let's say if I want to get together, I don't know, with like 10 friends and buy a place in Tokyo, like what kind of ballpark numbers are we looking at?
So I'm trying to think. I think our place in Tokyo was just around 100K, maybe a little above or a little under.
100K each or 100,000 between?
Total.
Oh, 100,000 total. What the hell? That's very doable amongst like a group of people.
Yeah. Now I have been looking for years. I mean, it's taken me 5 or 6 years to find a good place in Tokyo. Yeah. So that was the trickiest one for sure. But yeah, people don't realize how doable a lot of these things are.
That's absurd. What do you look for when you're looking for a place? Is it mostly location, or other factors that go into it?
So location is the number one factor. So it's essentially location and just a binary. Is this better than a place I would rent on Airbnb? Because if it's not, what's the point? You may as well just keep Airbnb. I mean, I guess there's some benefits, but that's sort of the main one. So in Tokyo, my big problem, what took me years, was that I stay right now, or before we had a place, I would stay in Shibuya with some friends. And so I know the Shibuya area really well. All the stuff I like to do is like walking distance from there. It's also one of the more expensive areas in Tokyo. And occasionally I would find a place that would like kind of work in Shibuya, but not really be that good. And then I had this thought where I was like, actually, my friend I stay with is like a 20-minute walk from the center of Shibuya. Probably I can find a place that's really close to a train station that has a line to Shibuya, and actually that might be better. So then I changed my search to be like, all right, what are good subway lines that go to the places I go to, and how close can I get to one of those? And that unearthed a few new neighborhoods, and so we ended up getting this great place that's a 4-minute walk from a train station, which is actually in many ways more convenient than the other place, because when you're on the train you can just read or mess around on your phone.
Damn. Okay. Right. I've got to do this at some point. This sounds really cool.
Yeah. Everybody thinks it's a big deal, and like it's this crazy thing where you have to like get a mortgage and you're getting $1 million property and it's going to be a real hassle. It's it's less than people spend on a car, and nobody thinks somebody's crazy for buying a car, especially a $10,000 car. I think maybe everybody put in 15K or something for Tokyo.
Yeah. Damn. Okay. So you sent my head reeling there. Good stuff. Okay. So you lived in an RV for a while. I know that Noah recently did a thing where he lived in a van for a few weeks. I've been also tempted to do the thing where you live in a van for a few weeks, a month. Like, I think you did it for like a very long time. What's it like, kind of living the van life before it was an Instagram hashtag?
Yeah. So surprisingly great. I mean, it has its downsides. It has its limitations. I forget how I even started. I think it was basically thinking back to that bus thing. I just loved road trips. I was living in Austin at the time, and through sort of this like weird deal with a friend who like wanted to invest in Austin real estate, I was living in essentially the best penthouse in Austin. And this is sort of before it was crazy expensive, but it was this incredible apartment with like a rooftop terrace and a hot tub and gardens and all this. It was a really great place. And so I bought this RV just for road trips. And I wanted my girlfriend at the time to come out and get it with me because it was over in Colorado or something like that. And she's like, well, I don't really want to go because I know that you're just going to drive 24 hours straight. It's going to be extremely boring. So if you're willing to make a couple stops, I'll go with you. We have to do at least 3 fun things. So I was like, all right, we'll do some fun things. So we went to White Sands, New Mexico. We went to Carlsbad Caverns. And I can't remember what the last thing we did was. And it was so much fun on just going back, like living in the RV, like cooking in the RV, looking out at White Sands, that literally by the time I got back, I was so into this RV, I only slept in that penthouse one more time. And it was, I forget, there was some, it was like I was trying to sell it or something like that. And so, yeah, we sold the penthouse. I parked the thing outside my favorite restaurant in Austin, and I loved it. You know, now I'm married and maybe in a different stage in life, and it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but I probably wouldn't seek it out. But I think for like certain people, for certain times in your life, I calculated that I saved $150,000 by living in it versus renting. And with that money, that's more than I spent for my place in Vegas and shares of my 5 home bases or 4 home bases. You know what I mean? So like, there are different ways you can sort of allocate your money over your life that, at least for me, that was better suited for me.
Okay, cool. And you mentioned a few times that sort of, and I think you put out a blog post about this recently, that sort of when you don't travel for an extended period of time, you find yourself being more like productive. What does productive look like for someone like you? Like for someone like me, productive is how many videos can I churn out each week, and
Right.
what's the sort of unit of measurement for you when you consider yourself in terms of productivity?
It definitely varies a lot. I mean, right now I'm just rewriting a bunch of old code, and so it's programming. Early on in quarantine, I bought a 3D printer and learned all about that, and made all the designed all these 3D things. So I guess if I were to think of like how I would qualify it, I would say like when I'm really engaged in something that I feel is useful. If I'm really engaged in watching 90 Day Fiancé, maybe that's not productive. But even if I'm really engaged in 3D printing, which probably will never make me any money or anything, I count that as productive because I'm learning something new that kind of adds to my skill set and is using my brain a little bit.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. So just going back to the traveling thing, I noticed you said that you traveled with your friend Todd or something for a while.
Yeah.
What do you think about kind of traveling with a friend or two versus traveling solo? Because that's something I've been thinking about a lot. I've never really done solo travel, and a lot of people talk about how it's great and stuff. But a lot of people also talk about how it's actually quite lonely and it's much nicer going with a friend. I wonder what's your experience of that been?
So I think it's worth trying both because, like you said, I've had that same experience where some people love it, some people hate it. I think I'm generally sort of ambivalent towards it. There are benefits to it, there are downsides to it. I think it does maybe help you. It depends who you're traveling with. Todd is an amazing travel partner, so I don't know there's any downsides to traveling with him. But I think when you travel by yourself, sometimes you're forced to figure out some more stuff by yourself. Maybe you have to make local friends, maybe, or you're doing 100% of the work of figuring out how the place works versus 50%. So I can think of a lot of like fond experiences of traveling solo. At some point, I realized for myself that travel was less about, I've been to maybe 80 countries at this point, and probably when I hit 65 or 70, I just sort of realized that there was very little marginal benefit in seeing a new place. It's like, not no benefit, but it's like, all right, I've been to Czech Republic. It's sort of like Budapest, but I don't like it as much. And I'm still surprised sometimes. I've been to, past couple summers, I went to Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and those places are incredible. So there's still some discovery, but the marginal benefit is much lower. Whereas when I first started, every new country was a revelation to me. As that change has happened, I found that the biggest benefit of travel for me is sort of quality experiences with friends. So now I basically only travel with friends, or I travel to visit friends.
Okay. And when you say, what sort of value did you get out of traveling kind of in the early days? Because when I think of traveling, I guess the only real sort of travel/vacation/holidays that I've been on have been with friends or family, where it sort of felt like we had a sort of a to-do list of things to check off. And one of the trips that I sort of did for an extended period of time, in our penultimate year of med school, we went on an elective where you get to travel anywhere in the world and do some medical stuff. So me and 2 friends, we went to Cambodia for 7 weeks and then traveling around Vietnam for 2 weeks. And that was really interesting because, like, for the first time, I was living in a completely new place and we could do things like, just hire a motorbike for like 2 months because it helps you get around places and like really explore a place without worrying about, okay, we need to tick off these different temples to visit. And I found that in Vietnam, we had a few days where we were doing like proper activities, and then a few days where we were just sort of chilling in Hoi An, and I would just kind of hang out in a coffee shop and like type stuff on my laptop. But I'm thinking, oh, this is like really kind of cool. And so everyone sort of talks about how there's all this kind of value in travel. I guess the sort of travel that you were doing wasn't the sort of I want to visit every temple in town. How do you kind of get value from it? Is it more like the people side? Is it more like what does it look like for you?
Yeah, I think, I try to see a lot of the big sites, but that's 5% maybe. I mean, now it's probably 0% or 1%. But, when we first started, it's like, well, I'm in Tokyo, I'm going to see some of the cool temples, or I'm in China, let's see the Great Wall. I'm in Paris, let's go to the catacombs or whatever. So there's some element of that. But I think the value for me is that it helped me just understand other cultures. And I don't think you can get some understanding of other cultures from reading books or going to those temples, and there is value in that for sure. But I think for me, where a lot of the value came was like you were talking about. You sit in a coffee shop and you just kind of see what's going around, and you get to know some of the local people, or you even just get to know expats who have been there longer than you, and they kind of explain how it works. And even maybe Japan is the place I've probably been the most out of the U.S. or one of them. I feel like I really understand why Japanese people, why their culture is as it is. Not 100%, of course, but, better than like, well, they used to all be ninjas, like maybe I thought when I was 10, I think that the value of travel is really hard to quantify. I think it's very hard to explain. Maybe someone better than me could do it, but I just remember like coming back from it sort of thinking like, I really understand how the world works a lot better. Like, maybe I went from 0 or 1% to 20%, not like 100%, but often it's that initial step in anything that's the most valuable anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so assuming sort of the lockdown rules get relaxed a bit, like I'm thinking like, well, I've got this year of unemployment. I definitely want to do a few sort of solo trips. Do you have any recommendations for like, as a sort of first-time solo traveler, how long should I kind of go for, and any kind of tips in general? Because at the moment, the only thing I have is kind of listening to Rolf Potts' podcast and reading Vagabonding, which is kind of more about kind of long-term travel-y stuff rather than sort of dipping your toes in the water.
It really depends on the place a lot. If you go to Tokyo and you have someone who's going to show you around there, you can get, it's so dense and so easy to travel, you're going to get a lot in 3 days. Not that I'm saying you should go for 3 days, but you could. Maybe, not that maybe Vegas would even be on your list, but Vegas is a place where I'd gone forever and I didn't get Vegas until I lived here, right? So there's definitely different time spans for different places. Is there anywhere in particular you're thinking about going?
I was thinking actually. So I've got a friend in Singapore who was going to have a wedding there, and so the idea was sort of August and September Singapore, and then doing the Southeast Asia, the whole Bali, Thailand, Indonesia thing. And then I was toying with the idea of living on a Japanese ski resort and learning how to snowboard for a month or so, and then toying with the idea of maybe doing Australia, New Zealand, and then toying with the idea of trying to sort of just do some South America stuff because I've never been there. So it was all just a sort of very kind of loose general geography over the year.
Yeah. I'd say maybe the best thing you can do is just leave it a little bit open-ended. Buy one-way tickets or buy changeable tickets or cheap tickets you don't mind throwing away because it's a $30 AirAsia flight. Yeah. I found that as I travel more, the value, you can't always be flexible based on flights and all that, but I think then you don't feel like you have a set time period. It's like, well, I'm going to go to Singapore and I'm going to hang out there until I feel like buying a $20 ticket to Thailand. You know what I mean? That kind of open-ended travel, I think it takes the pressure off, and if you don't like it, you're like, hey, I'm not really feeling this. Maybe I'll come back later. You can leave. And if you're loving it, you don't feel like, oh, well, I've got all these things I have to do. So maybe that would be my advice.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a plan. What is Wife Quest 3000, if I'm getting the name right?
Yeah. So I was going through this period. So in my life, I sort of was a real big procrastinator, not very productive. And that's sort of where Superhuman by habit came out, one of my other books, because I was like, I got to figure this out. And so I had these 3 years where I was building my blogging platform, and it was the first time in my life I was really consistently productive for like any amount of time. And I went bananas. I mean, I was like, I was working 12 hours a day every day. I had a list of 7 things I was allowed to do, and like one of them was eat. So like, there's not that much leeway there. And I sort of realized in that time that like I've done enough dating. I like dating, but I've done enough. If I meet the right woman, I'm ready to get married. Like I'm sort of at that point in my life. And given my work schedule, probably I don't really have room in my life for the kind of relationship that would lead to marriage. And so I was like, all right, I think I probably shouldn't be dating for a while. I should just force myself to not date for a few years. And then after that, I'm going to give myself permission to like really focus on dating. Right? Often there's a lot of benefit of like focus on one thing, move on to the next thing rather than do both of them half and half and kind of not succeed. So yeah, for like 3 years, I essentially didn't date. Maybe in the last year, there was sort of some gray area. And after that, I was like, all right, it's time to find a wife. And so I did, I handled it pretty poorly, actually. On my blog, I was like, hey, I'm single, introduce me to people. And it never occurred to me anybody would actually do it. I thought maybe one off or something. And so a lot of people ended up trying to introduce me, but it was not clear that the people I was being introduced to knew that they were being introduced. And like some of them I had information, others it's like, call my friend Jenny, here's her number. And I'm like, oh, I'm probably not going to do that. Yeah. So it was a pretty big flop. I ended up dating one person from it actually, but ended up not being the right one. Then met my current wife and actually got married. Yeah.
Yes. So my understanding is that you met your wife like randomly through Tinder or something, and circumstances just aligned, and you just happened to get on, and then it's like, oh, cool. So despite having this sort of big plan, I think you said that you were going to sort of help someone tick off anything on their bucket list or something, if they introed you to the person who you ended up marrying.
Right. Forgot about ours, yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, because after I heard about that, I was thinking, oh, okay, well, so maybe if I'm single at 30, maybe I'll just make a YouTube video and be like, hey guys, why don't you help introduce me to someone? But you wrote something on the blog recently about sort of aimed at your friends in their 30s who are not yet in relationships, and sort of about actively making it more of a priority. I wonder if you can kind of just talk about that a little bit, and because sort of I'm 26 now, and I'm also single, but I haven't really made relationships or anything or dating at all a priority. I've just sort of dabbled with Tinder and Bumble and Hinge like very, very occasionally, and then life gets in the way, and I feel like I've got these other things I could be doing, and I feel like my issue is that if I were to be in a relationship or like dating someone, I feel like in my head the bar is that I would have to enjoy spending time with them more than I enjoy sitting in front of the computer and doing a live stream or making a YouTube video, which is a very high bar. And I'm not sure if I'm thinking about this wrong. So as someone who's a few years older, do you have any advice on that front?
Yeah, I think that's not the right bar. So I think the value of a relationship is the investment, right? It's like you're putting something in so that, and it pays off over life. And if you're any good at relationships, you work on relationships, hopefully it gets better and better and better every year. And so far that's been my experience. And so if your bar is it better than something that's paying off immediately? Probably not. It's like, well, it's like investing in money. It's like, well, do I really want to put money in my stock account when I could buy a Ferrari? It's like, Ferrari is going to be a lot more fun next week. So for that reason, I don't think that's the right bar. However, I don't think everybody has to get married. I don't think everybody has to have a long-term partner. I think there are people who are happy to be single forever. I think there are people that they're like, yeah, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, that's great too. So, it depends. I think it's definitely one of those things where there's not one prescription for everybody. But what I saw is that, or what I have seen, I guess, is that when people are in their 30s, it's like you've dated a lot, probably, or you've at least been in your dating years for a lot. You know what I mean? Like if you're 30, you probably have been dating for 10 years. And, if you aren't making real progress towards if you want a long-term partner and you're not making a lot of progress towards it, you're probably doing something wrong. I mean, that was true of me for sure, and I sort of had to work through some issues to figure that out myself. And I see a lot of people who are kind of doing the same thing they've been doing because it's not totally unsuccessful, but it's like, all right, you're giving yourself a 20% chance of meeting somebody. Why don't you, if this is really as important as you say it is, why don't you make a plan where it's 90% chance of success? There's a disconnect between what your stated priorities are and what your actions are saying your priorities are.
Yeah, because I think most people would probably say that they want to get into a long-term relationship at some point and have kids, for example, at some point, and I would definitely say that. And yet, my actions are absolutely not in alignment with that at all right now. I'd say
you're a little young. I'd say like once you're 30, and it's different for everybody, but it's like you're working on your career. It's a priority. I think it's not unreasonable to, be doing that kind of stuff. But if you're in your early 30s and you're not moving closer,
So this is sort of turning into a therapy session, and I'm sorry about that. But one thing. So I've been on quite a few first dates, and at the end of them, I'm often like, I'm not really sure what to think. I think that I guess that was kind of fun, and I guess it would be kind of nice to see them again. But I don't know, maybe I wasn't really feeling it. Maybe I wasn't that attracted to them. And then I kind of think in my life, like all the people that I've sort of had proper crushes on have crept up on me over a long period of time. It's been sort of through a period of being friends with someone for a while and be like, oh, actually, she's very pretty and she's cool. But when it comes to dating, it's like you don't really have that period of a few years to just be friends with someone before realizing that you like them. So what should the bar be, in your opinion, or in your experience, for what warrants going on repeated dates with someone? Is it just a case of I enjoy their company? To what extent does looks play a part in this? It's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I don't really have any sort of answer to.
Yeah, it's a good question. So that's something I thought a lot about too. And my bar was, I will keep dating somebody until there's a reason I won't marry them. And first dates are weird. Like, I think especially as I got good at dating, it made me more aware of how the other person was feeling on a date. Whereas before I was just so nervous about myself, I was really not thinking about them at all. Yeah. And you realize that people are not themselves on first dates usually. They're nervous, they're trying to figure you out, they're trying to figure out how they feel. So I don't think a first date is a great bar. I think sometimes people are looking for that like instant magic connection. And while that does happen for some people, I think that would maybe, if there were like 10 partners that would be great long-term fits, maybe that's going to happen with 1 out of those 10, and it's not necessarily an indicator they were the best one. So I think you want to go on as many first dates as you can, because I think sometimes we don't really know what we're looking for until we see examples of it or the inverse. And then my rule was, I'll keep going on dates. As soon as there's a deal breaker, that's it. Even if I really like them, maybe I really enjoy their company and I'm attracted to them, like, if I know it's not going to go anywhere, why get myself into this weird situation where we're going to be dating and I'm kind of like, we're going to break up someday. Maybe it should be today. So for me, that worked, and I think that's probably generally a good starting point.
Okay, and in terms of the looks front, so I think I feel like I'm sort of like annoyingly shallow in this regard. In that, if I'm not like immediately very attracted to someone, I would just think, kind of what's the point? And I'm not sure if I've got too much of a high bar in that sense, especially because looks fade, and obviously looks are less important than personality, and like there's all this kind of baggage associated with kind of heavily like over indexing for looks. Like how do you think about how people should approach the look side of things versus the personality side of things?
Yeah, so I may be a little bit of a hypocrite because I think I got very, very lucky, and my wife is like a 10 out of 10 to me. So like, that said, when I was going through this, I sort of was like, okay, I have to be attracted to the person. Like, I don't want someone to date me if they're not attracted to me. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't make sense. I want to be attracted to them. And so I was sort of like, all right, maybe the bar is like a 7 or a 7.5. If someone's above or 7 or 7.5, looks fade, and I think also interest in looks fade too, right? Like, I've dated very attractive women who, once I get to know their personality better, I'm like, they physically don't look as attractive to me because I'm so annoyed with their personality, right?
Mm.
And I think the opposite. I've definitely seen situations where, you know, there was a girl who I thought was like a 10 out of 10, and then sort of like looking back, I'm like, oh, like actually she was like wasn't even like a 7 out of 10, but just her personality was so good, she kind of got me in this bubble, you know. So I think it matters, but I think like set the bar at 7 out of 10. If your goal is to find the most attractive wife possible, you're going to be really happy for a couple years. And then you're just so used to this person, it still matters. But I think within that range of 7 to 10, it almost doesn't matter.
Okay, cool. That's really helpful. You used the phrase when you became good at dating. What does good at dating mean? And to what extent is that like a social skills versus a pickup artist? Like what does good at dating mean?
I mean, you know, it could mean something different for everybody.
Yeah.
I guess when I started, I felt clueless, and I felt like probably the more time a woman spent with me, I feel like there was this sort of curve where like, you know, we're starting at zero. The first hour or two, she's probably going to like me less because I'm going to be awkward. I'm going to be weird. I don't really know what I'm doing. If she happens to accidentally hang out with me for like 10 hours or something, maybe then I calm down enough and there's enough good attributes about me that she'll actually like me. So I feel like that's what my curve used to look like, which was really bad for meeting women, of course, right? Because if a woman meets you and she's liking you less and less by the minute, she's going to leave.
Yeah.
So, you know, the only women who I really connect with would be women who were like friends of friends in my social group who sort of like ignored me while I was weird and quiet and introverted and embarrassed. And then as I got to know them, I could open up. So eventually I got to the point through pickup where I realized that it was pretty much a linear function of like the more time a woman spent with me, the more she was going to like me. And it wasn't even conscious things I had to do anymore. It was the subconscious things I would do because I understood where she was in that process. I understood what she cared about. I understood what attributes of me she would be interested in, what stories she would be interested in, what she wanted to talk about her life and how I could bring that out of her. And this would all just happen naturally. And so I felt like it was almost like a problem where it's like, oh, I don't want to spend time around my friends' girlfriends because I feel like, you know, they're going to start liking me. And so for me, that was sort of the, you know, of course, some girls still don't like me or go on a date or go poorly. They don't want to go on a second date. But generally, that curve really changed for me.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And what sort of stuff did you do to make that curve change? Asking for purely selfish reasons here.
Yeah. I mean, it was really just the stuff I was talking about earlier, where it's just like, I think the biggest one was really just understanding. I felt like through talking to so many women, I developed almost like a simulator of other people's brains, not just women, but like anybody's brain, where like before I say something, I know how it's going to impact them and I know how that's going to make them feel. And so, and then I also understood, okay, well, especially a woman, if she first meets me, she's probably skeptical. She's probably, depending on the situation, maybe a little threatened, if not physically, but like, this guy's going to like take up my time and be weird and maybe like creepy. Like, you know, you sort of know where you're starting out. And so I think, okay, well, I want her to feel comfortable, right? That's maybe the first thing I want her to feel. And I want her to feel maybe intrigued instead of like, oh, who's this guy? Like, oh, okay, he's a little bit different. So just, and this is all sort of happening on a subconscious level, but I'm like, okay, well, in the simulator, what of the 20 or 100 things I could say right now would elicit that sort of response? And again, these aren't like pickup lines. These are like, which of my stories that are true stories can I tell, or how can I react to, you know, should I make a joke? Should I respond to her joke? Should I ask her something? And it just sort of happens naturally. It's not like I'm really even thinking about it at that point. So it's sort of like you have this simulator and you just sort of like naturally say the things that are going to help the other person enjoy the conversation.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like I need to go on more first dates and just sort of get more data points in here because at the moment I have like a single digit number of data points here and
yeah.
It's
You
a numbers game
definitely
to
want to
some
go on
extent.
as many first dates as you can.
Okay, sick. Right, I'll be starting from next week as soon as these lockdown rules kind of ease up a bit. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about. So I remember reading somewhere that you don't drink. Is that still the case?
That's correct. Yeah.
So Can I ask why not, and how has that? So for example, I don't drink either, and often I think that, oh well, if I do traveling and stuff and end up living in a hostel, it's all a very party atmosphere, and I won't really fit in because I don't drink, and I have this sort of limiting mindset about the whole drinking thing. But you've clearly done it
Yeah.
without drinking. Like how does that work for you?
Have you ever drank?
No.
Okay. Interesting. Usually it's people who used to drink and then stopped that worry about it, and usually the
Right.
people that never drank, it feels normal. So I've never felt like it's hindered me even a little bit, to be really honest. Part of that is that I don't really like, if it's a party hostel, I don't want to be there. So, I think one thing I learned through pickup and sort of why I stopped going out was that when I went out, I went out every night for 7 days a week and met a lot of people, and I liked a lot of them. They were nice people and had great interactions. But I sort of had this realization where I'm like, I've done this for a couple of years and I've never once met somebody where I was like, maybe this is the one. And that's like a pretty low success rate. It's 0, over a pretty good sample size. So, that's just one example. I think also in traveling, it's like, maybe when I first started traveling, I was a little bit more like, I'd go to like some festival like Carnival or something like that to experience it. Now, like, I don't do things on weekends. Like, I just don't want to be there when there's like, it's just sort of not my scene. So I think you just sort of have to think about whether that's your scene or not. I think another thing is that there are ways you can talk about not drinking that will make you interesting to people, and then there's ways you can talk about it that are going to push people away. And both ways are equally true, right? It's not like there's, oh, I just like, I've never liked it when people are like, oh, I'm not drinking tonight. It's like sort of a lie. It's like, it's true, but you're not. In general, if I'm getting to know somebody, I want them to get to know who I really am, right? And I'm going to show them the right sides at the right time, but there's no point in somebody liking you for not who you are, because it's just going to cause problems down the line. So I think you just think about like, what's a way that you can relate that is going to make that person intrigued, and you're going to find common ground even if you have different habits.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, because I think early on in my university days, I was, because I'd never drank, and because a lot of the whole sort of first year of university thing is a lot of it is based around drinking, and I felt that often I wasn't really able to connect with a lot of people that I knew, because all of the stories and all of the discussion was, oh, did you see what Joe got up to last night at the club type situation. And sort of early on, I found like my tribe of people who enjoyed just hanging out and playing board games and and stuff, and that was like really, really fun. And I guess when it comes to traveling, you can also find those sorts of people. I guess I just sort of have in my head that for some reason, when you go traveling, you have to stay in a party hostel. But I imagine there are all sorts of other ways to meet people traveling that don't involve staying in a party hostel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be the easiest way, but it's also maybe the lowest common denominator way. I mean, I don't mean that to insult anybody, but it's sort of like anybody can show up, and the bar to entry is you get drunk. So it's like, there are going to be some great people there. There are going to be some kind of crappy people there. So, I guess for me, I just sort of realized like almost none of my friends drink. I mean, a few of them do, but I tend, there are people that drink that I really like a lot, but I tend to end up being friends with people who don't drink, because it tends to be similar values that lead to that decision. So for me, it's like, even if there's fewer people at non-drinking things, there's probably more people who I actually want to connect with.
Nice. Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense. Just a couple more things that were on my sort of list of things to definitely ask you about. One of them is tea. So like, you're super into tea, and I want to get more into tea. Like, what do you love about tea, and how does one get started with tea? If my background is, I live in England, so I drink a lot of tea, but it's like an English breakfast tea bag with a bit of water, and then add a bit of milk, and then take the tea bag out at some point. Like, but I know like you're super into it.
So why do you want to get into tea?
Because it seems kind of cool. So it's kind of like why I wanted to get into coffee. Initially, I was like, well, I kind of want this. I feel like everyone needs some kind of vice, and I feel like I don't really have many vices. And so coffee is one of those interesting vices where everywhere in the world you go, you can find their flavor of coffee, and you can get super into it, and there's all sorts of, you can have a conversation about coffee. It becomes, in a way, this cultural experience, like going out for a coffee with someone, or there's just like a lot of social stuff associated with the drinking of coffee, and I wonder if it's similar to the drinking of tea, and I'm curious to try it out. That's sort of why I want to get into it.
Cool. Good reason. Yeah. I actually think tea is even better than that. Like, the community of tea drinkers is such an incredible group of people where, like, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a retail tea shop that's in business to sell tea. It's like what they do. And they end up giving me like, $30 of free tea, drink tea with me for 3 hours, and then won't let me pay. And you have these like fascinating conversations with these people. And it's like, that's never happened to me anywhere else. I think maybe it happens sometimes in like bars. Maybe there's some aspect of that. But like, if I think about tea houses I've gone to, it's happened to almost every tea house I've gone to. It's just like really good people. And I think the conversations you have over tea are great too, because they're not short, right? They can last a really long time and keep steeping the tea. You're in the UK. How far are you from London?
About an hour. Very doable.
Okay. So your first step is to go to Jing Tea, Jing Tea.
Okay.
In London. I forget exactly where it is.
Jing Tea. Okay.
Not sure if they're open right now or not. So whenever they open, and they have a tea tasting, a tea flight, where they'll give you a tasting of like 3 to 5 teas or something like that. I went and did it with a friend. They didn't charge us. They just let us in. When you know about tea, they tend to not charge you sometimes.
Okay.
The owner or manager of that store probably spent 2 or 3 hours with us, poured us these teas, gave us tea to leave with. Like, it was this amazing experience. And the guy who runs it, or at least who was managing, was like an incredible human being. Like, super nice guy, really knowledgeable. I feel like these days, I've been into tea for a dozen years. Very rare to meet somebody who knows a whole lot more than me. I feel like this guy probably knew 5 times as much as me. Really, really great, knowledgeable. And it's their tea is really good. So go do that. If you enjoy that experience, I think he could probably even give you better tips than I could on the next steps. If you don't enjoy it, you should not get into tea because you won't like it. If you don't like that, you're done.
Okay, perfect. So the Jing Tea flight, whenever it opens at some point in London.
Yeah, and I'd say for anybody else, like, if you can get to Jiaozhou in Budapest, that's my #1 favorite tea place in the world. I've got a lot of recommendations for Japan, although they're a little more formal, a lot less casual. But yeah, Jing Tea, actually, you're lucky. Jing Tea is really one of the better ones to start with.
Oh, sick. Okay, I'll be checking that out as soon as it opens, if it's not open already. So you have this sort of personal blog platform that you've been working on for a while. I've been trying to talk about basically everyone I meet. I try and talk into starting a personal blog, and I've got kind of my list of talking points. But like, what's your take these days on, should people have a personal blog / what is the point of it?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, don't use my blogging platform. I haven't worked on it in 10 years. It's obsolete. Don't sign. Use a different one. But use a self-hosted one. Use like WordPress or something like that. Don't use Medium. I think what's interesting so first of all, I don't know if everybody should have a blog. I actually think what you're doing, being on YouTube, might be more valuable these days. And I think I'm just aware of how much work it takes to do what you do. And so I've thought about doing it, but I'm like, that's like taking on 3 new jobs, and I know once I start something, I won't quit. So that's why I haven't done it.
Yeah, mate, it's really fun. I would recommend.
Yeah, that's what people say. It looks fun. So I don't know that blogging specifically is what people do, but I think should do. I think there's a great amount of value in creating a big body of work that's yours and yours alone, both in ownership and in view. The benefits I've gotten from my blog are essentially none of them are things I thought I would get out of it, or maybe not the specific things that, random connections or invitations to things, or just people know what I'm into in my life. And so they're like, hey, I saw you were into this. You should check this out. And it's something really valuable. Anytime I start a new business or some new thing, people will buy it, or at least give it try it. So, there's those external sort of benefits. I think for me, it's made me a much clearer thinker, because I think, about 10,000 people are going to read this, which isn't a huge number in terms of blogging. But if I imagine myself standing in front of 10,000 people, I don't want to look like an idiot in front of them. So I try to think things through a little more thoroughly. And in the same way that you were talking about storytelling, it's like, well, what today would make a good story? Sometimes I think what today would make a good blog post, and it sort of makes me analyze my experience a little bit more, which I think has some value. So yeah, I think, but I think the same could be said for having a YouTube channel or a podcast or, any number of ways to express yourself. But I think too many people are in the business of getting all of their ideas externally and sort of retweeting things and, reposting rather than creating their own content. I think it'd be great if more people would create their own stuff.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's kind of the sales pitch that I give people. I tend to say blog sort of knowing that I think for a lot of people, especially people sort of my age or younger, the industry of blogs is less of a thing than the whole following someone with a YouTube channel. Whereas if you're super into tech, then everyone has a blog, and so it's natural to follow someone's blog. But like my housemate knows nothing about tech and has no idea what a blog even is, and so she's like, "What do you write on a blog?" And I was thinking, "Whoa, that's such a different kind of perspective to what I'm used to, sort of being into tech and startups and stuff. It's just so radically different." But everyone kind of knows the whole. Yeah, I've got a YouTube channel, I've got a podcast. Possibly not. Like there are still tons of people in the world that don't know what a podcast is and how you subscribe to one, but that's kind of a separate thing. Final thing I wanted to ask you about. So you have this. I came across this like Las Vegas based coaching program thing that you offer, and I was this was like some point last year, and I was seriously tempted to sign up for it, but then there was this other podcast you were on where you said that often people will want to do coaching calls with you just to ask your permission to do something. And I was like, shit, this is exactly why I wanted to do like like join your coaching thing, just to because at the time I was really wondering that, do I want to take a year out of medicine? Do I want to like maybe try and travel the world? And the obvious answer to me was like, yes, obviously I do, because at this point in my life where I've got no responsibilities and I've got this YouTube channel that makes enough money that I can travel the world, it's just such a no-brainer to do this sort of stuff. And yet I had this nagging sense that, I kind of need someone's permission to do it. I wonder, is that something that you've seen a lot from people looking for advice on the internet, if that makes sense?
So I'd say I get that more in emails. So when somebody reads my blog and they send me an email, the barrier to entry for that is not very high to send me an email. So, I get a lot of them, and often it's like, hey, here are 10 great reasons why I should do something and no great reasons why I shouldn't. Should I do this? Right? So, I say also like, yeah, but give yourself, don't do it because I told you to do it. You've done the analysis. You should do it. And I would say sometimes, maybe more with the phone coaching, I would get people who would do one call and it was sort of like, hey, should I do this? I'm like, yep, you should do it. And that's it. I think the people who go to the live, that's kind of a big deal. It's like, it's relatively expensive. Plus you have to fly over and spend days and, tell your friends why you're leaving. It's kind of like a bigger investment. So those people, I think it tends to be, so far they've had really high quality problems to work on. And same is true of all the coaching people that, I've been working with on an ongoing basis.
Nice. Okay, good stuff. Right. So that was everything that I think I wanted to talk to you about. Firstly, thank you very much for taking the time. This has been a lot of fun. Do you have any sort of requests that you would like to make to the audience, to people who are watching this? Anything you want them to check out / any sort of parting words?
Oh God, not really. I'm on Twitter. If you want to follow me, you can go to my blog Tynan.com. Do what you want to do.
Oh yeah. On that note, why don't you have a surname? What?
So first of all, I have a unique enough first name that I got the .com, so that's great. It sort of started in the pickup times when it's like a weird fringy thing to do. Most people's gut reaction to it is negative. Just didn't want my family members to be subjected to it, I had a weird stalker at one point who found a lot of my addresses that were fairly private. And so I just thought well, if I can keep my identity a little bit private, I may as well. It's not a huge thing. I thought about putting it out there, but it's sort of why do I keep writing my blog? I've been doing it for 14 years, keep doing it. Same is sort of true about not having a last name.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I guess it's become sort of a brandable thing in a way because there's
Yeah,
there's not many people who kind of just have a first name, or so it seems on the internet.
exactly. Yeah. The funny thing is, there's actually a few other Tynans now, and one of them started an Instagram group for all the Tynans on Instagram, and goes months. There's maybe 30 of them,
Yeah.
and so there's like lots of no comments, and then every once in a while it's like, "Hey Tynans, how's everybody doing?" And it's all like 16-year-olds, so it must have been like a popular name 16 years ago, or popular like have gone from 0% to 0.0001%.
Yeah.
So it's like the weirdest group I'm in. It's like me and these like 16 to 18-year-olds who speak in like a weird internet language I don't really understand anymore. And then some famous DJ named Tynan. So it's a pretty funny little group.
Oh, nice. Cool. Well, that's something I've always kind of wondered. So anyway, yeah, thank you very much, Tynan, for taking the time. This has been a lot of fun. Guys, links in the video description to Tynan's website and all his books and stuff that you should check out. And at some point, I'm going to be doing a sort of book club episode of Superhuman Social Skills, and sort of we'll try and chop out bits from this conversation to sort of include in there. And I'll send you a link when it's ready.
Great.
All right. Well, thanks for taking the time. Thanks for everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time.